I'm Nathan, and welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Tonight's story starts with a load of laundry. That sounds small, I know, but stay with me because I've learned that betrayal almost never announces itself with a slammed door or a lipstick stain. It shows up in the quiet logistics of a household. Who gets packed for, who gets cooked for, and who, at 12 years old, is standing alone in a dark house at midnight washing his own clothes because nobody else will. The man in tonight's story came home 2 days early from a work trip and found exactly that. He found a note on the refrigerator that I still can't read out loud without my jaw tightening. And then his son, calm as you like, folded his shirt, looked up, and said 8 words that turned the whole thing inside out. Here's what I want you to watch for tonight. The difference between anger and patience. Anger is loud, and it burns out fast. Patience is quiet, and it keeps receipts. This father had 5 days while the people who heard his bow were out at sea and reachable, sipping drinks they didn't pay for. 5 days is a long time in the hands of the right man. This is his story. Dalton Creel could tell you whether a signature was real from across the table, and he could usually tell you what a person was worth, not in dollars, in character, inside of 10 minutes. It was the family joke back when his family was whole. His first wife, Celia, used to say he'd been born with an auctioneer's eye and a locksmith's patience, and that the combination made him impossible to buy a surprise gift for. Dalton was a certified estate and fine art appraiser. The man banks and probate courts called when somebody died and left behind a house full of things that might be junk and might be a fortune. He'd grown up watching his mother clean those same kinds of houses in the wealthy end of the county. A single mom with 2 jobs and a rule she repeated like a prayer. We don't take what isn't ours, baby, because a thing you steal never stops belonging to somebody else. Dalton built a career on that rule. Provenance, he liked to say, is just a story you can prove. He testified in courtrooms, caught forged Audubon prints, and faked Civil War letters, and earned a quiet reputation across the state of Maryland. If Creel signs off on it, it's real. Celia was the other half of that life. They'd met at a flea market in Austria, the little brick harbor town where Dalton still lived, when she outbid him on a box of broken pocket watches, and then, seeing his face, offered to split it. She restored old jewelry at a bench by the window of their house on Tillman Street, and when their son Rory was born, she hung a tiny brass compass over his crib and told him it would always point home. Rory came out quiet and precise, a kid who lined his crayons up by height, who took apart the toaster at 7 and put it back together better. He was 9 when Celia got sick, and 10 when she died, and in the last week of her life, she pressed her cameo locket, the one her own grandmother had carried through Ellis Island, into Dalton's hand and said, "This is Rory's someday. Tell him it points home too." After the funeral, the locket went into Celia's jewelry box on the dresser. 6 months later, it was gone. Dalton tore the house apart twice. He blamed the movers who'd hauled Celia's workbench to storage, blamed his own grief-fogged head, and finally stopped talking about it, because every mention put a crack in Rory's face that took days to close. That missing locket was the one case the great Dalton Creel never solved. Remember the locket, it matters. He met Annika Duval 2 years after Celia passed, and looking back, the meeting was so smooth it should have squeaked. She turned up at an estate auction, where Dalton was the appraiser of record. Mid-30s, polished, funny in a low voice, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order the second time she saw you. She worked with her mother's company, Duval Estate Liquidations, the biggest estate sale outfit in that corner of Maryland. Her mother, Henrietta Duval, was a fixture in 3 counties, silver-haired, church on Sundays, sat on the hospital auxiliary board, hugged widows at funerals, and then handled the sale of everything the dead had left behind. People called her a saint. Henrietta ran her family the way she ran her sales. Everything tagged, everything priced, everything hers. There was a brother, Rudy, who drove the box truck and cleared houses, a sister, Joel, who did the books, and around them a comet's tail of cousins and in-laws who showed up wherever Henrietta pointed. Annika was the jewel of the operation, the closer, the one who sat with grieving families at their kitchen tables and got the contract signed. Dalton, a widower with a paid-off house, a respected license, and a lonely kid. Dalton never had a chance. He just didn't know yet that he'd been appraised. The wedding was small and the takeover was total. Within a year, Henrietta had sold her own drafty farmhouse at a tidy profit through her own company and moved into the in-law suite at the back of the Tillman Street house, the one with the big locked oak cupboard she'd brought on Rudy's truck, wrapped in moving blankets like a coffin. "It's Louis Quinn's," she told Dalton when he offered to appraise it. "Family pieces, sentimental, you understand." She kept the only key on a ribbon around her neck. Dalton, who had spent his whole life respecting other people's locks, let it be. That was the year the temperature started dropping for Rory. It happened happen the way frost happens. No single moment. Just one morning you notice the ground is hard. Anika's warmth toward the boy, so convincing during the courtship, developed a schedule on when Dalton was home, off when he traveled. Rory's drawings came off the refrigerator to make room for cruise brochures. His chair at Sunday dinners migrated toward the end of the table, then to a folding chair, then to a plate left on the counter. Joel's twins got new bikes in the driveway. Rory got told that 11 was old enough to stop expecting Christmas to be a production. And Henrietta had a way of talking about Rory in the third person while he stood right there. The boy tracks mud. The boy eats like a field hand. The boy is not strictly speaking family, is he? He's the previous administration. Dalton pushed back, and this is where you have to understand how good these people were. Every time he raised it, the scene got flipped before he finished a sentence. Annika would cry, actual tears on demand, and say she was trying so hard with a child who wouldn't let her in. And did Dalton have any idea how it felt to compete with a dead woman? Henrietta would lay a soft hand on his arm and murmur that grief makes fathers see monsters where there are only growing pains. They were fluent in a language Dalton was only starting to learn. The grammar of making a decent man doubt his own eyes. And Dalton's work schedule did the rest. His reputation meant contracts up and down the coast, 2 weeks authenticating a collection in Savannah, 10 days on a Museum DX session in Pittsburgh. He'd call home every night, and Annika would hold the phone up so he could hear a household that sounded warm. And Rory learned to say, "I'm fine, Dad," in a voice specifically engineered not to worry anyone. Kids do that. They protect the parent they have left. It's the bravest, saddest thing in the world, and it works, which is the problem. That October, Dalton took a 3-week contract cataloging a shipping magnate's collection outside Charleston, the biggest fee of his year, the job he almost turned down. Annika practically packed his bags. Her whole family had been humming for weeks about something, conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Henrietta on the phone with her voice pitched low, Rudy grinning at him across the yard like a man who knows the punchline. Dalton put it down to the Duvals being the Duvals. He kissed Rory's head, told him to hold the fort, and drove south. The job collapsed 19 days in. A dispute between heirs froze the whole estate. Lawyers descended, and the client paid out his contract and sent everyone home. Dalton didn't call ahead. He'd tell you now that he doesn't fully know why. 20 years of reading rooms, maybe. Some appraiser's instinct that the story he'd been told about his own house wouldn't survive an unannounced inspection. He drove 11 hours straight, and at 4 minutes past midnight, he turned onto Tillman Street and found his home standing dark, not asleep dark, empty dark, no cars, no porch light, and from the basement, one thin blade of yellow under the door, and the sound of the dryer turning, and his 12-year-old son standing at the folding table in the half-light, working through a basket of his own laundry with the focused and hurried motions of a boy who has done this alone many times before. Rory looked up, and the first thing he said, the first thing at midnight in an empty house, was, "Dad, don't be mad. I was going to have it all put away before Sunday." Dalton kept his voice level because the boy's face was a seismograph, and he refused to let the needle jump. "Where is everyone?" he asked. Rory shrugged with one shoulder, the way he did when a thing was too big to lift with both. "Cruise," he said. "They left Tuesday. It's on the fridge." The note was in Henrietta's handwriting. Dalton knew it instantly. He'd spent a career reading hands, and hers was all confident loops and entitled pressure, the script of a woman who has never once been told no. It was held to the refrigerator by a magnet from Duval Estate Liquidations, and it said, "Took the family on a cruise. 5 days. Bahamas my treat. The family earned it. There's money for pizza. The boy isn't invited. He's your mistake, not ours." It was signed with Justin H. The way Queen signed things. Dalton read it twice. He was aware of his own heartbeat, of the hum of the refrigerator, of 30 years of his mother's voice saying, "We don't take what isn't ours," and of something older and colder assembling itself behind his ribs. They had left his son, a 12-year-old, alone in a house for 5 days with pizza money, the way you'd leave a key under a mat. And they had put it in writing and signed it because it had never once occurred to any of them that Dalton Creel was anything more than the house they lived in, and the license they borrowed respectability from. He folded the note along its crease, slid it into the inside pocket where he kept his loop and his cotton gloves, and turned around. And that was when Rory, still folding, still not looking up, said it. "Dad, Grandma doesn't know I found something unbelievable in her cupboard. She keeps the key on her neck, but she left in a hurry, and the little door doesn't actually latch latch if you know where to press. You should see this." And Dalton followed his son down the hall, and Rory pressed a knuckle into the carved reset on the corner of Henrietta's grand locked cupboard, and the little door slid open, and Dalton looked inside. And then Dalton Creel, exhausted, betrayed, 11 hours of road behind him, and his dead wife's ghost beside him, began, very slowly, to smile, understand what Dalton was looking at, because it took even him a moment. The cupboard's upper shelves were theater, hymnals, a china shepherdess, the props of a harmless grandmother, but the lower compartment, behind the little door that didn't latch, was a filing system, and Dalton Creel had spent 20 years learning exactly what honest paperwork looks like so that dishonest paperwork would glow in the dark. There were 9 accordion folders, each labeled in Henrietta's confident hand with a surname and a year: Swan 2019, Abernathy 2021, 7 more. Inside the first one Dalton opened a will, a power of attorney, and a codicil. 3 documents, 3 different elderly signatures, and all 3 witnessed by the same 2 names, and the same ink, and what his trained eye read instantly as the same hand disguising itself twice. Under the folders sat a cigar box, and in the cigar box were rings, wedding bands, engagement rings, a man's signet, each one tagged with a tiny string tag and Duval Estate Liquidations lot numbering. Each tag matched to a name and a date. Trophies, inventoried like stock, because Henrietta Duval had never in her life met a thing she loved that she didn't also price. And there, third from the left, tagged lot for foresee in the same neat hand, was a cameo locket on a worn gold chain, Celia's locket, the one that had vanished from a dead woman's jewelry box 6 months after her funeral, the one unsolved case of Dalton's career, sitting in his mother-in-law's cupboard with a price on it. Rory stood beside him holding a folded shirt like a shield and said, "That's Mom's, isn't it? I remembered it from the picture on your desk. That's why I kept looking through the rest, Dad. Why does Grandma have Mom's necklace? So now you know." Why he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Men like Dalton don't get happy at midnight in front of evidence like that. He smiled because the picture finally resolved, the way a forged signature resolves under magnification. Every stroke that had felt wrong for 3 years suddenly explaining itself. The courtship that had found him, not the other way around. The company that got first call on half the estates in the county. The saint of 3 counties who hugged widows on Sunday and sold their houses on Monday. And a locket that could only have been taken from inside his own home by someone with a key and a reason to believe a grieving man wouldn't look hard at family. He was not holding a family secret. He was holding an operation, and purely by the grace of a cheap latch and a curious and loved, magnificent little boy. He was holding it with 5 full days on the clock while every player in it floated around the Bahamas on a ship called the Coral Sovereign, out of range, out of reach, and absolutely certain they had gotten away with all of it. Dalton put his arm around his son and said the sentence that reorganized both their lives: "Buddy, you didn't do anything wrong, and you're not spending another night in this house alone." Then he took out his phone, photographed the note on the refrigerator where it hung, and started making a list. If you've watched this channel before, you know the moment. Every one of these stories has it. The moment the quiet man stops absorbing and starts documenting. He did not touch the folders that night. That's the first thing to understand about how a professional does this. Dalton understood that rushing into a situation without thinking could destroy everything. One careless move with the hidden documents could allow a skilled defense attorney to turn the investigation against the very person trying to expose the truth. Instead of touching anything unnecessarily, he carefully photographed the concealed compartment exactly as he had discovered it. He captured wide-angle shots of the cabinet, then zoomed in for close-up images of every document, every corner, and every detail. Years of working as an appraiser had taught him that evidence only mattered if it could be proven exactly as it was found. When he finished documenting everything, he gently closed the secret panel until it blended perfectly back into the cupboard. Nothing looked disturbed. Then he walked upstairs and quietly made eggs for himself and Rory, even though it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. They sat together in silence until Rory finally began talking, truly talking, for the first time in months. The stories that poured out were more painful than the handwritten note Dalton had found. Rory described forgotten birthdays, canceled plans that were never rescheduled, and countless afternoons when nobody remembered to pick him up from school. He explained how Anika's entire personality seemed to change the second Dalton left for work. The warmth disappeared, replaced by cold indifference. Rory admitted he had started washing his clothes late at night because every time he left them in the washing machine during the day, someone would dump them onto the garage floor. He had been told that his belongings were not supposed to mix with everyone else's. Dalton listened without interrupting. His hands rested quietly on the table while he nodded, speaking gently so Rory would know he was finally being heard. By sunrise, Dalton Dalton knew this was far bigger than family problems. He contacted the client whose estate work had brought him out of town and simply asked that nobody mention his early return. Then he reached out to the one prosecutor he completely trusted, Priscilla Vang, who headed the state's Elder Justice Unit. She already respected Dalton because he had testified honestly in several forgery cases without ever exaggerating his findings. Later that afternoon, they met at a quiet diner away from town. Dalton handed over his phone and explained everything from beginning to end. Priscilla studied every photograph twice before asking if he had ever heard about several suspicious estate cases involving elderly victims whose wills had mysteriously changed shortly before they died. None of the investigations had produced enough evidence to support criminal charges, even though the circumstances looked remarkably similar. Dalton compared signatures from those older cases with what he had discovered inside the cupboard. He pointed out differences in pen pressure, writing rhythm, and stroke direction that ordinary people would never notice. Documents could appear perfect until someone trained to read handwriting examined them carefully. Once those details became visible, the paperwork told an entirely different story. Within hours, search warrants were being prepared. The following morning, investigators entered Dalton's own home while he personally opened the hidden compartment. Over the next 2 days, they uncovered original wills that had been secretly replaced with forged versions, financial ledgers connected to estate sales, buyer records, and decades of handwritten notes identifying elderly victims according to their vulnerability. The files revealed a systematic operation targeting lonely widows with little family support. Among the records, investigators found a page bearing Dalton's own name. It had been written long before he met Annika. The notes described him as an ideal target, a respected widower with a valuable professional reputation, stable finances, and a young son who might complicate future plans. Dalton realized his entire marriage had been engineered from the beginning. He had not fallen into a loving relationship by chance. He had been carefully selected. Even worse, hidden photographs and years of text messages connected Annika to probate attorney Lyman Crow. Their relationship had existed long before Dalton entered the picture and continued throughout the marriage. Crow prepared the legal documents. Henrietta identified wealthy elderly victims. Annika built trust with people who could later be exploited. Dalton's respected signature had unknowingly helped legitimize estate inventories connected to the scheme. Instead of reacting with anger, Dalton remained disciplined. The entire family responsible for the operation was away on a cruise with almost no reliable communication. That unexpected opportunity allowed investigators to quietly collect evidence, subpoena financial records, and contact surviving family members from previous estate cases before anyone involved realized the investigation had begun. Meanwhile, prosecutors arranged an undercover meeting with Lyman Crow by presenting him with what appeared to be another profitable estate opportunity. Believing he was speaking privately with trusted professionals, Crow casually explained how similar transactions had worked in the past. Moments later, investigators identified themselves. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he quickly agreed to cooperate. Crow admitted the organization had manipulated multiple estates over many years while moving millions of dollars through apparently legitimate estate sales. He also confirmed something Dalton had feared. Plans already existed to rewrite Dalton's own estate documents. If everything had gone according to schedule, Annika would eventually control his property, his financial assets, and Rory's future. The boy would be sent away to boarding school once the paperwork was complete. That evening, Dalton sat beside Rory's bed and explained the truth as simply as possible. He told his son that some adults had chosen money over honesty, but none of what happened was Rory's fault. The hidden cupboard would help restore justice for many innocent families. Rory quietly listened before asking if he would finally be allowed to wash his clothes whenever he wanted. Dalton smiled and promised that from now on they would do laundry together every Sunday afternoon, right in the middle of the day, because it was their home. Several days later, the cruise returned. State investigators met the family as they stepped off the ship. Henrietta immediately tried to charm the officers, believing she could explain everything away as she always had. That confidence disappeared the instant investigators mentioned the executed search warrant. Her instinctive glance toward the key hanging around her neck revealed exactly how important the hidden cupboard had been. The criminal case that followed uncovered years of fraud. Dalton patiently explained signature analysis to the jury, document by document, while forensic specialists confirmed every conclusion. The evidence proved overwhelming. Henrietta received decades in prison. Annika accepted responsibility through a plea agreement, and the marriage was legally erased because it had been built on deception rather than genuine consent. Crow lost his law license and served prison time, while other participants faced convictions and financial penalties. Recovered assets were returned to the families who had lost everything. Elderly victims who could still be helped finally received justice, and future targets were protected before they ever realized they were in danger. Dalton eventually recovered the treasured family locket that had belonged to Rory's mother and gave it back to his son on his birthday, reminding him that some things are priceless because they represent home, not money. Life slowly became peaceful. Again, Rory filled the workshop with old clocks and mechanical projects, while Dalton accepted a position helping an honest estate company authenticate valuable collections. His first rule appeared on every contract: never take what belongs to someone else, because stolen property never truly stops belonging to its rightful owner. Every Sunday afternoon, with the basement lights bright and the front door open, father and son did the laundry together exactly as promised, not because it was symbolic, but because ordinary moments shared with honesty were worth more than every fortune the criminals had tried to steal.